Hello, and welcome to this week's sermon. This sermon is for the 8th of December 2024. That will be the second Sunday of Advent, Year C. And two readings, Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 to 4, and Luke chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Thank goodness for church nativity plays that start appearing at the beginning of December. Without them, the church's run up to Christmas would be a sobering and uncomfortable ride. Advent season traditionally kicks off with a consideration of the Day of Judgment and the end of time. It then progresses through various fiery Old Testament prophets to the rather caustic acclamations of John the Baptist. It is usual that both preachers and congregations meet fourth Sunday in Advent with a sigh of relief, as we can finally embrace the Christmassy theme of the Virgin Mary and carol service. Who has not smiled and cried at the sight of little angels with their white wings and tinsel halos, shepherds in their tea towel headgear, and wise men with their bricks of paper gold, and the odd donkey who loses his tail and has it picked up by one of the teachers before the innkeeper is sent sprawling. Today, however, we are presented with Malachi's warning that the long-awaited coming of the Lord to his temple will be like a refining fire, or like fuller's soap. It will be a time of cleansing and purifying of God's holy priests and people. Secondly, we are presented today with John the Baptist's opening words. Fortunately, we are spared the more fearsome bits that come later about nests of vipers and axes laid at the roots of trees, but we hear enough to get a feel for what tirades are to follow. Let's start with Malachi. Malachi dates from after the temple and the city of Jerusalem were rebuilt following the exile in Babylon. Despite this marvellous tour de force of reconstruction after the devastation of war, the prophet accuses the priests of becoming lazy in their worship, offering below standard sacrifices, and of leading the people to dishonour their God. Malachi speaks of marriage and divorce. He is probably using this as a metaphor for Judah's lack of faithfulness to the covenant. Judah was once married to God in a close and loving relationship, but now they have married other women and divorced their first wife. That is, they have abandoned God and espoused new interests and priorities in life. The result is that the priesthood needs a complete overhaul. Things are currently so bad that their half-hearted efforts in the temple have no effect. God has turned his back on them. They then complain that there is no point in believing because the wicked prosper better than the righteous, and thus they are tempted even more to give up on their faith. Malachi says God is still just, but the priests have led the people into such a state of apathy that God has now turned his back on their worship. The lack of any power in their religion has been their own doing. They should have made more effort to be faithful. One response to this apparent breakdown in the effectiveness of their religion is to long for the day when all will be put right by the day of the Lord, or in other circles of Judaism, the coming of the Messiah. This brings us to today's passage in Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 to 4. In today's passage, Malachi is telling the people that the day of the Lord they are longing for may not be quite what they are hoping for. It will not be a happy time when God's glory descends once again to the rebuilt temple, but it will be a time of judgment, cleansing, and replacing of the old with the new. The coming of God to his temple will be preceded by his messenger, who will come like a refining fire, a super hot fire that is so hot it can melt away the dross and impurities even in metals. This is no cosy cottage fire in front of which we would wish to sit and read on a cold winter's day. This is a very, very hot and difficult to endure heat. But its heat is necessary to fulfill its purpose. This is industrial fire. Fuller's soap is no luscious beauty balm to clean and soften the skin. Fuller's soap is a strongly alkaline soap used to cleanse, bleach, and beat newly woven woolen garments to thicken up the fibres or to make them full, hence Fuller's soap. I've never used it, but I suspect it's absolute murder on the hands and a very caustic and unpleasant thing to use. That is what the day of the Lord will be, and it is the fault of the priests and the people who have followed their lead. For many churches around the world, Malachi's words resonate with disturbing clarity. Churches of all flavours are beset with disillusionment, loss of energy, and loss of hope. I have never encountered so much frustration in the ranks of my fellow ministers and leading lay people. Much of that anger is directed at the hierarchy of the church, which is accused of leading us into a spiritual wilderness and allowing us to be taken over by vociferous minority pressure groups who push a narrowly party political view of the social gospel or an impossibly rigorous green agenda. In many churches, these alleged failings have been compounded by years of inaction and obfuscation on things that really should have occupied their time, such as a sexual abuse scandal. I know that people feel this way about their churches across the spectrum and in many countries. It is difficult to describe the arrival of John the Baptist as good news. He voices all the dissatisfaction with the religious leaders of his day that many would wish to voice today. He thinks they are out of touch, have lost their spiritual authority, and that the day of reckoning is fast approaching. Things must change, or we are doomed. John the Baptist's critique of the religious life of his country is as caustic as Malachi's Fuller's soap, and as fiery as his refiner's fire. Yet there is good news to be found in the Baptist's anger and cry of frustration. Change is possible. Things can be renewed. Unfortunately for Jerusalem, the transformation only came at the price of the death of the great reformer, Jesus, whom the authorities found too challenging and disturbing to embrace. And so they paid the price of seeing the whole collapse of their religious institution and their nation and loss of their homeland. Not all reformations, not all changes of direction need to be so costly. But that is up to us. How far are we willing to go before we consider changing direction? Churches and religious institutions are not the only ones in deep trouble around much of the world at the moment. Politicians are even more unpopular in many quarters than religious leaders. In this historic year for democratic elections around the globe, we have witnessed various degrees of resignation and dissatisfaction with the choices on offer. One key element of the current political climate is that new governments lose their popularity almost as soon as they take office. The disastrous start the Starmer government has made is just one obvious example. There has been a sense of giving up on politics altogether in some quarters. In others, that this voting round is the last throw of the dice before they turn their backs on mainstream political parties for good. The world is in a delicate and troubled place this Christmas. Yet, as we will be reminded in this year's nativity drama and in the singing of our carols, the world has been sitting on the edge of a precipice before. Into such a world, hope was born and laid in a manger, because the world was preoccupied elsewhere. We extend our prayers and best wishes this Christmas season to all those who feel at the end of their tether, in any context. We share our hope with the frightened, disillusioned, and marginalized, that hope, faith, joy, and peace can never be extinguished forever. No darkness is dark enough. No pit of despondency is deep enough. The Star of Bethlehem shines on, out of our reach, unsullied by our scheming and self-serving enterprises. We may be in for a rough ride until things improve again, as Malachi and John the Baptist warned. But the light of Christ will burn on through the night, in both church and society, until a new dawn breaks over the horizon. Amen.